I now call on the Leader of Fianna Fáil, Deputy Micheál Martin. 10 minutes stay.
Ceann Comhairle agus uachtar an Parliament de Europa chum fáilte fi le ród chuigár Parliament agus déanam corgáidegus leat a socht an méad atá buinte amach agat I rite héal agus go háirithe I ggóhéics obair na Parliament san Europe. Mr. President, I would like to join with my colleagues in welcoming you to Dáil Eireann. It's a very fitting time for your visit, both because of the growing importance of the Parliament itself and, of course, which you lead and the unprecedented crisis that's now faced by member states across Europe, by the institutions of Europe, and above all, by the citizens of Europe. In your political career, you've built a well-earned reputation as a person of passionate beliefs that also seeks and encourages candid debate. Now, the UCD student debate, which you participated in last night, along with deputies from this House, including my colleague, Deputy Dooley, who you earlier promoted to the leadership of the party in a jest afterwards. Such was the power of his performance last evening. But I think it also was a very good example. It was a very good example of the passion and the candid and the frankness of your approach. And I think the seriousness of the issues facing Europe at this moment is such that and I'm glad we haven't allowed today's session to be just merely an exchange of formalities. I think over the last few years, there perhaps has been too much formality, too much going through the motions, and nowhere enough leadership or urgency. And I think your address to the Parliament today was devoid of all of that approach, and rather you spoke candidly, honestly, and openly about many of the issues that face us collectively across Europe. Because Europe does need to face up to hard truths about what has gone wrong and what is required to return to growth and job creation. The price of failing to do this has already been felt by millions throughout the Union and could affect many millions more, as you have said. And Mr. President, if you look back through the history of Ireland's engagement with the European Union, you will find that perhaps we've always been suspicious of the European Parliament. In treaty negotiations, we have always favoured retaining as much power as possible in the Council. And this has been because of a fear that the Parliament is less open to being influenced by smaller nations and groups. And even with the introduction of majority voting, our ability to be heard and to have an impact in the Council is undeniably higher than it is in the Parliament. It is important to note that many steps, of course, have been taken and are taken in Parliament to address this concern, especially with the groups helping the smaller delegations to be heard. Our MEPs retain a strong direct link with the people, and as a result, the Parliament retains a higher status here than in some other member states. Arguments about the appropriate balance between the powers of the Parliament and the Council have been at the centre of nearly 3 decades of debate. Recent treaties have further increased the powers of the Parliament, and the balance appears to be working. However, the undeniable fact is that most of the time spent on arguments about the balance between institutions of the Union has been wasted time. It has been a major and ongoing distraction from addressing core flaws in the powers and policies of the Union, which lie at the heart of today's crisis. These are flaws which still threaten the very foundations of the euro and possibly the Union itself. I speak as a leader of a party which has always been unequivocal in its support of the great idea that only by working together can European states prosper. And as far back as the 1930s, one of my predecessors, Sean Lemass, talked of this being essential in tackling Europe's then crisis. He subsequently lodged our application for membership, a decision which was vindicated in the growth and rising living standards which membership of the Union enabled. And President, in your address, you again articulated very well that progress and that sense of opening up that occurred in Ireland as a result of our joining the Union itself. And earlier this year, my party took the principled stand of putting aside partisan considerations by campaigning for ratification of the fiscal treaty. What we are not, however, is uncritical. We do not accept the idea that the job of pro-Europeans is to stay quiet and cheer from the sidelines no matter what is happening. And what is happening today is that Europe's leaders are making the crisis much worse by their refusal to take action which is ambitious enough, courageous enough, are comprehensive enough. From the very start of this crisis, there has been a search to do the minimum possible to muddle through the crisis. Only at moments where collapse has looked possible have essential decisions been taken. A vicious cycle of where problems are only addressed when a collapse seems imminent, or the solutions are oversold, complacency sets in, and deals are allowed to unravel, has not been broken. That cycle has not yet been broken. And one of the most serious impacts of this failure of leadership has been a dramatic decline in public satisfaction with the Union and belief in its core purpose. For the first time in the Union's history, a majority of its citizens believe it is headed in the wrong direction and are concerned about its future. At the same time, Europe's traditional enemies from both the right and the left have been emboldened. While ignoring their own histories of opposing everything that delivered jobs, rising living standards and peace to Europe, they are pushing their anti-EU agenda with a new force. As we saw during our own referendum here, they have many attacks, but their proposals fall apart under basic scrutiny. But no one should underestimate the damage they can do as they put their cynical and populist search for votes ahead of offering credible alternatives. There is no way that this situation can improve unless the leaders of Europe acknowledge that their behaviour last year, their failure to show all members respect, their exclusionary negotiations and their timid agenda combined to cause enormous damage. The effort last week, as you have referred to in your own speech, of 3 governments to impose their will concerning June's banking deal was partly caused by the failure of other countries to be more active, but it was nonetheless unacceptable and directly contrary to the spirit of solidarity without which the Union cannot work. The attitude to what is now termed the legacy debt of the crisis betrays a continued refusal to accept what has happened. In Ireland's case, a significant amount of the bank-related debt we took on was directly driven by the fears of the ECB, as you have alluded to yourself, and others, of contagion in the financial system. We showed our solidarity at that time, and to brush this off as a purely national matter is a disgrace. It is also now widely acknowledged that the lack of measures in place today is the reason why Ireland needed a support programme in 2010. The different funds which have been put in place, as well as the ECB's new OMT facility, have completely changed the dynamic of the crisis. Had the proposal of Guy Verhofstadt, the leader of our group in the Parliament, for Eurobonds been accepted 2 years ago, we would now be looking back on the euro crisis rather than fearing where it will go next. There are a number of specific policies, Mr. President, which I believe are desperately needed. The banking union is now the most important. Without it, confidence in the European financial system will never be fully restored, and therefore growth will be undermined. National regulation within a multinational currency has failed, as you so eloquently detailed in your contribution, and it must be replaced. Equally, a common approach to bank resolution and deposit insurance is unavoidable. The effort by some countries to impose common rules but reject any possible transfers reflects a continued adherence to a model so flawed that even its principal architect, Jacques Delors, has criticised it. The European Central Bank must be allowed to push ahead with a bond purchase programme which is unlikely to be needed if it is allowed to be established. There is no way of avoiding the need to give confidence to investors that there is a lender of last resort. Mr. President, should various of your compatriots succeed in their campaign to stop Mario Draghi, it will be a dark day for the people of Europe. The Union's budget will shortly be debated, and the usual arguments about diverting money from existing programmes will be had. And quite simply, Europe has set itself objectives which cannot be met without a significant increase in the budget. It has no real capacity at the moment to turn around regions with mass unemployment. It cannot alleviate the austerity which is inevitable in some countries, but quite avoidable on a pan-European basis. And you rightly raised the youth guarantee and the issue of youth unemployment. The litmus test for that will be the EU budget. Rhetoric on its own and agreements and memorandums of understandings will not solve that. The litmus test for our sincerity, for the sense of urgency that we attach to the issue of youth unemployment will be really tested in the context of the European budget itself. and it is a key moment in the evolution of this crisis. Unfortunately, in fact, the current debate appears to be all about undermining the one area where the Union has a comprehensive and progressive support policy. The days of food mountains and wine lakes are well over. What European funding is now enabling is permanent food security, rising food quality, and the protection of a rural environment which would otherwise be under great pressure. Ireland's rural communities are innovative and forward-looking, but they and similar communities throughout Europe what they receive from these programmes is absolutely essential and must be protected. This is a moment when citizens need the Parliament to act as a counterbalance to the ongoing failures of the leaders who meet in the Council. Citizens need the Parliament to take up these issues with the energy so lacking from the heads of state and government. Citizens need the Parliament to be a voice for a budget which protects programmes which are working and funds direct support for countries and regions which are bearing the biggest brunt of the crisis. Citizens need the Parliament to be true to the Union's founding ideals of solidarity and generosity between states, and to push others to be true to them as well. Mr. President, the crisis which caused a generation of visionary leaders to found what is today the European Union was a dark one, hopefully never to be seen again. And I look forward to our continued ongoing relationship with your presidency. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Deputy.